retired FBI Agent John Desouza.
Test it. 1, 2, 3.
All right. I'm so glad you're here.
I am.
Thanks, John.
Good stuff. Oh, man.
So, a couple months ago, when I was here, Angie and I had dinner with he and his wife, Bella. And in the words of Angie, when we left, she goes, Dave, I've never gone to a dinner and had my head spinning like it is right now after sitting with you and Bella. First of all, you got a beautiful wife.
Thank you.
Really a nice lady.
Thank you.
And thank you for the service to our country.
Thank you.
And I worry about our country, John.
I know, me too. And in some ways, I wish you weren't here today to be able to talk about you a little bit. I just want to tell you guys, I was in the FBI as a special agent investigator for 25 years, but I left almost 9 years ago. They still try to pull me in every once in a while, but I've tried to stay out of that. I have a lot of friends there that are still active duty, still working. And one of the things that we always talk about is missing persons cases. And so obviously we have to talk about David Paulides and his work as well. And my friends in training division have said, oh yeah, we know his work. This was very recent. We know his work, we're aware of it, we know what it's all about. And I told him, well, you know what? You don't know about this movie that's coming out right now, because it is going to create a hailstorm on you guys. And it really is. This movie is huge, huge news for law enforcement, for what the kind of pressure they're going to get now as a result of this movie. Because it is the first time that in all of David Paulides' work, which is very carefully watched by a lot of people, it is the first time that David is actually putting in a possible paranormal cause in the title of the movie, and actually in consideration of the entire thing. That is huge news for law enforcement that is so used to closing these cases, putting them pending inactive, putting them closed, putting them cold, and just walking away from them. That's what they typically do, especially the FBI. And that's been a cause of great concern for me over many years that I've been fighting with them over this. And it's just something really awful. That's why I'm so glad that this movie is going to be coming out, and it's going to be giving law enforcement, including Department of the Interior, park rangers, all of these people who they're just not interested in doing investigation in these areas, in the area of disappeared people. They're just not interested. And it's not because they're a part of some conspiracy to make these people disappear, as some of us people have suggested in the past. It's because they just consider these cases no wins for them. No wins. I mean, we have right now a huge number of indigenous women who are of Inuit, Inupiaq heritage throughout Canada, northern Canada, and also Alaska as well. And just enormous numbers of Native women who are disappearing, just disappearing. And it's minimal, rock bottom, minimal investigation done. And only now we're having some efforts being done by Alaska State Troopers and also Royal Canadian Mounted Police that are making some efforts in these areas. And it's due to work like the stuff that David Paulides is doing. So I just wanted to thank you for that, because that's important.
Thank you. So, John, talking about the case of Ray Salmon in British Columbia. So you have a UFO connection there. You have a gun up here, clothing over here, no evidence the person's anywhere to be found. You got a SWAT team coming there and telling searchers you can't go in there. At one point, does federal law enforcement step in and start entertaining ideas outside of the conventional?
Well, federal law enforcement, they tend not to come in if there's not a military base involved or federal property involved, or what we call a police cooperation request from a desperate sheriff or a desperate local official who's at the end of his rope, and he's just saying, okay, we gotta call in the FBI, see if they can help with this. That's how it comes up usually.
So let's say the Park Service has I know they have hundreds of disappearances there that they won't admit, and they won't release the numbers.
Yeah.
And it's only through 10 years of my work that I've uncovered hundreds of their cases. Yeah. And many of them just seem to go into nowhere. And the special agents assigned to the National Park Service, not FBI special agents, but National Park special agents, don't seem to have an interest into the arena I talk about.
Yeah.
So what would happen if the National Park Service special agents asked the FBI to get involved in something like that? Would they?
Yeah, they would. Under some sort of police cooperation request, yeah, they would go in, they would lend resources, but what the FBI typically tends to do, unfortunately, is that they will not open a separate FBI file on it. They will just handle it as a police cooperation request. That's called a stovepipe. What it means is they'll just handle it as off FBI files, as a local police cooperation request, and then there'll be no track back on it. So that, because they consider it a loser. A loser means something that's not going to be prosecuted, it's not going to be solved, and they just consider it that, so they won't open up a separate case, and it won't be considered as serious as if they had a separate FBI case on it. If they have a separate FBI case, then the director's going to be involved, and they're going to have to solve it. So that's one of the little tricks that they do to avoid these things.
While I have you here, so there's a case in Crater Lake National Park. 20-year-old man comes there in the middle of winter. People see him, and he disappears. Car's there, but he's gone. And parents file a missing persons case with Crater Lake National Park, and case goes on for 2 years. They don't find anything.
Wow.
2 years later, 12 miles into the park, people are backpacking, and they step up on a big Douglas fir tree. And at the bottom of the Douglas fir tree, they see a body laying there, bones, and they call the National Park Service. So I interviewed the man who rode out there for the National Park Police. He says, Dave, 20 years, I've never seen anything like this. The pants were pulled down to the knees, and all that were left was the waistband of the underwear and some other things. The body's there, but the police officer says, Dave, this happened in the middle of winter. 12 feet snow drifts. No snowmobiles are allowed in the park. He didn't have any skis or snowshoes. We didn't have any idea at all how he could get 12 miles in. And the scene was too crazy. So they call an FBI evidence response team from Portland. Now, this is nowhere to be found. He tells me this while I'm interviewing, and he gives me the dates. So I file a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI, and I get a response back saying, your request is denied, because I'm asking for all the reports from their response to that. You know what their response was? Because of privacy concerns over the victim, you can't have that report.
Then that means it was active? The case was still active?
No, the guy was dead.
Right.
And so I wrote back, I appeal this because the victim is deceased.
Right, they can't, yeah.
They said, no, the family has privacy concerns, you can't have that report.
Wow, sounds a little crazy.
Little.
Right. Yeah.
So on that one, the person, it's essentially impossible for him to get from the lakeside to 12 miles into the wilderness.
It's the cabal. It's the biggest conference. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So, that was fun.
It was not the FBI. They don't care about what I do. They don't. They really don't. They have enough problems of their own.
Hey, this is just part of the course for your movie.
Yeah. So, getting back to FBI investigations in your world. So one of the things that you said in the movie was that you did paranormal investigations for the FBI. So who would assign you to do those investigations?
They're normal investigations that turn that way. They become that. It tends to be that way. Or it could be just me working peripherally with another group of law enforcement to advise and consult, and then just going forward with them until we hit that paranormal hard stop, like trying to help out the agents in Montana, in Idaho, where the ranchers with the cattle mutilations. You know, those things were huge. Those investigations in the 2000s. Those were huge. I mean, we would.
John, what would you classify those cases as?
The cattle mutilations?
Yeah.
They tended to be classified as vandalism and attacks on property. The attacks on property, and those were police cooperation cases as well.
So if somebody wanted to FOIA those cases, could they ever get a hold of them?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Listen, everybody can FOIA cases. Freedom of Information Act. As a matter of fact, you can actually go into archives. The FBI has been around for 120 years, and you can go to vault.fbi.gov, where all the repository of all unclassified cases are, and you actually go to that site, vault.fbi.gov, go to that site, and they have buttons on the side. And some buttons say supernatural cases or cases of extrasensory perception. There's cattle mutilation cases. You go to, and they have these buttons. There's UFO cases. And you go to these buttons, you just press on those buttons and go see all these documents that can be downloaded for free. Everybody can get them.
Did you write any of those?
They're older. I think a couple of my cases ended up in those. But those are huge repositories.
So did you work mutilated cows?
I have, as an adjunct.
And what was your conclusion?
Our conclusion was that we couldn't stop them. We couldn't stop them. We would go there and consult with the security forces, the security teams that were trying to help these ranchers. And we would go to see what is it that they're doing. And no matter what they did, there was always, they set up, we had surveillances set up everywhere, all over these huge properties, acreage. And we had all of these things. And there would always be, we would come back, look at all the CCTV, all the security, and there would always be a flash of light, and then all the mutilations would be done in a nanosecond, according to us. I mean, according to what we saw. So those cases there was no real result on those cases. We had to basically just walk away from those.
So when you went out and investigated those, did you ever take chemical analysis of cows and things?
Yeah, we tried, but the best, we took analysis, we took all those things, but we have separate chemists that do that. We have special teams that do that, and they would come and they would collect all that material. But then once the case was concluded, then that would go back under the control of our FBI headquarters that sometimes wouldn't let us see the results.
Even you?
Yeah, even the case agent. They would just stop that and just neutralize it, and then the whole thing would just go away. That's what we experienced.
What does it tell you when you can't see the results?
Oh, it tells me that they're hiding something, because whatever they're hiding would require more work. And they don't want to do that. They want to put a little button on this and just close it out and just say, it's all due to predators. When our reports said back to headquarters, well, the greatest investigators we have working on this are the coyotes and the wolves that are in the area that are telling us there's something incredibly supernatural about this because they won't go near the carcasses, which makes no sense. And then we would measure, there was some radiation on these carcasses. We ended up, requesting special teams, just take some, just for laughs. And yeah, the radiation was elevated, but it wasn't deadly or anything. So it didn't answer why the predators won't go near these carcasses. The carcasses only had the mucosae removed, everything that was like mucus producing tissue. So the predators should have eaten up these things. It just doesn't make sense. And the radiation didn't explain it either. So that right there tells you that these predators are really doing the investigators' job. They're telling us that there's something incredibly bad about these carcasses.
So let's pretend, because I'll tell you that Eastern Oregon had a rash of these type of cases in the last 3 to 5 years. So let's say that was Portland's jurisdiction, the Portland office.
Right.
Now, on something like that, would Portland special agents investigate those cases, or would they send agents from DC out there and do it anonymously?
They could do both, depending on, our headquarters can do whatever they want. They could say, yeah, send Portland field agents there, go do whatever you want. And then when they get a hair, they find out that something's not being answered, or that it's looking like, somebody said the word UFO, they could say, oh, no way, we're not letting field agents do this. And they could send special teams from headquarters, yeah. That's been done often, as a matter of fact.
So in the movie, and Jonathan talked about these parallel dimensions. You spoke about it too.
Yeah.
So how, and I briefly touched on this in front of you, but in front of the audience here, let's pretend we switch seats. You're Dave Paulides.
Okay.
And you've got a family that's been missing a child in the woods.
Okay.
And you try to explain to them how it could possibly be this multi-dimensional issue or portal. I can't do that. How could I ever explain to them what this possibility may mean?
You can only do it if they are already spiritual people who understand the spiritual dimension that is going on in our physical world. If they have that, then you can explain it to them. Because extra dimensionality, again, extra dimensionality is the key to everything that goes on in these movies. We're all hitting a wall. We're hitting a wall where there's no clues. There's no physical clues to these disappearances. These disappearances are not murders. They are not kidnappings, because we have no clues, no ransom note, no criminal scene of violence, no blood splatter. Some of these people disappeared in seconds. So it leaves you with the final conclusion that there's something extra dimensional going on here. People just please get my book, The Extra Dimensionals, by John Desouza, The Extra Dimensionals, where I explain all of this. This is a question of portals. This is a question of creatures coming here from other levels of reality, and somehow they access our physicality. They can apparently be physical for short periods of time. But then it doesn't last that long because all the Bigfoots, when they're being hunted, they somehow disappear. And then official sources take care of hair and tissue samples. We always send the hair and tissue samples back to the labs. And what do the labs do? Well, the labs have to be licensed every year. So none of them are going to say to the state, hey, we just found a sample of a unknown animal. They won't do that. They just won't do that. They need to get licensed. So they're just going to come back, undetermined results. Undetermined, all of your samples. Even FBI lab will do that. So that just shows you how controlled they are on everything that they do. That's why it's so hard to get anything in the physical world results for these phenomena that appear to be extra-dimensional, as I said.
One of the things in our interview we were talking about was if you go out and you do an investigation and it results in a paranormal explanation that you would end up with, that your supervisor may tell you not to put that in the report.
They usually don't do that. They'll just take the entire report and shoot it somewhere, I don't know where. It may not go to the people it's supposed to go to. That's the preferred method because bureaucrats don't want to put themselves out there for the most part. They'd rather lose a document than tell the agent, I'm changing your words. They'll almost never do that.
So one of the things we've all read about and heard about in the news is in the last 5 years, the FBI has taken some major hits.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And those hits that they're taking, do you believe they're justifiable hits?
Absolutely. And I tell my friends in the FBI, I tell them all the time, you guys are going to get dispersed. FBI is going to be dispersed because they're just too clear present. No, that's good. That's good. Because they're now a clear and present danger to patriotic Americans and people who just consider themselves Americans. And you cannot do that. You cannot have that. And that's why we're at the point now where the FBI just has to be dispersed because we can't have people with that much power going after the American people. It's just wrong. And this has happened before. Here's something historical that people don't know. The federal law enforcement in this country was handled by a private contractor group for 60 years in this country, from Civil War, which I think was 1860, right up until 1908. And it was a group called the Pinkerton Detective Agency. The Pinkerton Detective Agency.
This is true.
They had thousands of members. And they had women and minorities before, anybody even thought of it. And they all dressed in these beautiful plaid suits that had the nice bowler on it that they had. J. Edgar Hoover didn't come up with anything original. He copied everything from the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And they had all the latest weapons all the time. They had all the latest weapons, big bulges around their jackets. They were a tremendous group. But then, towards 1900, they got very corrupt. And they started going after the American people. And in about 1900, the year 1900, they actually got involved in working for Rockefeller and Harriman and all of the big magnates of industry, and they worked as strike breakers. And then we had incidents in Philadelphia and New York City where dozens of people were killed. Dozens of people were killed in strike breaking, which was considered the biggest danger to America at that time. And they actually had about a dozen Pinkerton men were also killed. So it just became, so then the Congress said, okay, these guys, we cannot have them anymore. So they passed what they called, and just so you know, the Butch and Sundance case was their last chance in 1905 to try to capture Butch and Sundance, and that would have been their last chance to keep existing because it was such a high-profile case. And then the Bolivian president betrayed them and killed Butch and Sundance with the Bolivian army at that time. He said he was going to hand them over to the Pinkertons, but he didn't. And so then, that was the end of the Pinkerton men. And in 1905, the Congress passed the Anti-Pinkerton Act, removing them from all federal law enforcement. And that was the end of them. And that's what happened then. It's happening now again. And I try to educate the FBI on that every time I talk to them.
So it's public knowledge. There's been up to 15 FBI agents in the last month that have asked for federal protection of being a whistleblower.
Whistleblowers.
Is there real protection for them?
Well, I think there will be. I think they have to have it now because the FBI is going to be dispersed, like I said. If those whistleblowers, they need them to come forward and they need to protect them and they need to help them to do what's right. And I think it will happen. I think it will happen now.
Did that surprise you that they came forward?
Yes, it did. Very much so. Because, especially that many, that means something big is going on with the FBI and the Department of Justice, which also has to be overhauled and replaced at this point. Yeah.
So in your years of investigation, did you ever come to a supervisor and say, hey, we have this information, and they say, we don't want to hear it?
Oh, sure. That happens a lot. Especially with me, it happened a lot. We had times when not just me, but many law enforcement people after 9/11 happened. And we had all kinds of special teams removing the rubble from there and getting...
So explain to the audience, you were one of the 3 core FBI agents assigned to 9/11, right?
No, that was in 93 when we had the previous one. There was an attempted bombing of the World Trade Center that happened in 93. And then the trial happened in 94. I was one of the main agents for that.
Okay.
That was it.
So
but I also worked the World Trade Center when in 9/11 as well.
Okay, so I already know what the answer is on this, but so on those big jets, I don't know if people really understand this, but the tires and the wheel assembly systems on those jets weigh tons, and they're solid pieces of steel. How many wheel struts did they find in the wreckage at 9/11?
None.
Did you guys hear that?
There was nothing in there. Nothing in there
so
from
John,
the planes.
how is that possible? Now, some of the press is going to say, well, they melted.
Yeah, they said that, and they had other explanations too.
So you come to your special agent in charge, and you say, hey, we've got this information. There was nothing there. What do they say to you?
They say, just forget about it. Don't talk to anybody else about this, and just do your job. Which your job is just to do whatever they assign you to do. That's what they say, typically.
And did you feel like your ethics were compromised?
Yes, not only me, but every law enforcement agency we had that was on the ground doing the removals and going through the rubble. There's no plane parts. There was nothing. Even though the New York Times was reporting at times opposite. They were reporting things. We had one reporter that actually reported, several seats, plane seats were found with bodies strapped in the seats. We found like 6 or 7 of them, and they were found. And then we looked at that and we said, wait a second, if that's true, we need to know about it. How did this New York Times reporter find out about that? We went to his editors, and the guy had been removed from the scene. The reporter who actually wrote that, and his editors told us it was a prospective story, that they do this. They write stories ahead of time, and then they say, I'm ready to use this story when it happens. And it never happened. We never found anything inside. But he still published the story in the New York Times. And then the editor just poo-pooed us and said, oh, this is standard practice, but he's been assigned to Alaska now, so you guys can't talk to him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous.
So what do you tell a supervisor?
We tell them, something's wrong here. This is not lining up. And not just me, but all the special teams that were in there working that rubble, they all knew that something's not lining up. There's no plane parts in here. If we saw what we think we saw, that's impossible. That's completely impossible. And yet, that's what it was. And you'll have the scientific types making up BS stories, like scientists always do, that, oh yeah, well, it melted selectively. It melted, the plane parts melted, or something else that's just as nonsensical. So that's what happens all the time. And that's happened to me several other times too.
So when we talked about this, my head would have been spinning like The Exorcist, but I had heard this before from other people that were working the wreckage, that they were stymied and in disbelief that they weren't finding anything that pointed to a plane in the wreckage.
Right.
And the one thing that kept coming home were those giant wheel assemblies that were huge, that would survive a catastrophic, 20-story building collapse. You would eventually find them.
Or the black box as well. Yeah.
Did they ever find those?
No, they never did. They never did.
Now, did that bother you as a person?
Oh, absolutely. But I was kind of used to it, though, because that had happened several other times on big cases as well.
Where you were told, hey, just forget it.
Yeah, just leave it alone. And not just me, but other agents too, and other police officers that work these areas as well. We're always told by the bigwigs, just leave it alone and just do your job. Another job, not this one. That's it.
Were you ever threatened while you were in the FBI?
Yeah, in the FBI, they have very special punishments. I like to always say that I am the most decorated and punished FBI agent in the FBI ever, in their history.
Oh, hey, and you're still here talking.
Right. Yeah. The standard punishment in FBI is to put you on what's called the dreaded surveillance squad, the special operations group. It's hard. It's the worst work there is in the FBI. They just lock you in a car that you have to follow criminals and terrorists 24/7, and that's all you do. You just follow them on the ground, and you're supposed to have a plane also helping you and stuff like that. It's the worst job there is, and that's a standard punishment. Whenever you would ask too many questions or do things they don't like, they would just throw you on the surveillance squad for like 6 months or so. It's torture. It's literal torture. Anybody who's ever worked this area.
So why did you get that?
Why did I get that?
Yeah, what'd you do?
Oh, I got that like 3 or 4 times during the course of my career. Oh yeah, it was. I'm trying to think all the incidences of why that happened to me. Oh, one time it was because it was actually here in Arizona because it was W. Bush called the office. I was in the FBI and I was trying to get the FBI to help me to pursue this terrorist that we had here in Arizona. It was the time of Osama bin Laden, and he was one of the Osama bin Laden supporters. And it was a huge deal. And I had just been put here in Arizona as a hotshot counterterrorism agent. And so I was trying to get the FBI here in Arizona to help me pursue this terrorist mastermind that we had here. He was right here close to the U of A. And and they wouldn't do it because they said it was too much resources, it was too much commitment, and I just like to pursue the Muslims because I hate them. That's what the upper brass here in Arizona told me. So they said they were not going to get involved in my phony baloney terrorism case. And then President W. Bush called the office. He called Phoenix office because he got it in the presidential briefing book that there was a terrorist leader in I think it was Tucson, Arizona. In Tucson, Arizona, and that there's a special agent, John Desouza, who says he's got the goods on him, and he wants to investigate him, but this was like a high level. This was a major case investigation, which means I would get planes, I would get all kinds of resources. Well, Arizona FBI didn't want that at the time. They said I was just like they said I was persecuting the Muslims, which, I mean, that's what my job was. I was working against Al-Qaeda. I was working against Al-Qaeda. So, I mean, these were radical Islamic jihadis. Anyway, W. Bush called the office that day, and when I walked into work, W. Bush said, why aren't you guys, I can't do his accent, but he was saying, why aren't you guys helping John Desouza get this guy? What the hell's wrong with you guys? And the FBI brass were like, oh, they didn't really have anything to say. So after that day, I got all the resources I wanted, and I got to pursue that. But as soon as I arrested that terrorist leader and all of his followers, right after that was done, they threw me on the surveillance squad. It took them a year to do it, but they did it because they were so mad at me. But that's a typical type of thing that would happen.
So there is retribution.
Oh yeah, they always try to get you. Yeah, and they try to get you in effective ways. They knew that the surveillance squad was the worst possible thing you could do.
One thing I heard through the grapevine through my other friends is that you and Comey were really good friends.
Yeah, yeah, you know. Yeah. You know, in 2012, I left the FBI in 2013, and the reason I left, it was 25 years, so I mean enough already, but still, I left because they were at that time we had Renegade was the president of the country. For those of you who don't know what Renegade is, he was the most vile creature that ever was put in charge of this country. And Renegade actually had another creature more vile than him named James Comey, that he decided he was going to throw the FBI under James Comey. And James Comey was just a terrible, terrible person. He was basically a water carrier for the Clinton Foundation for 20 years. That's basically all he did. All he did was help the Clinton Foundation for about 20 to reduce their investigations, to get their investigations shut down, and that's basically all he did. So I tried to tell the FBI, you cannot let this guy be put in charge, but Renegade was president, and we couldn't stop it. But anyway, he found out I was talking against him, and he sent an angel of death to my office to try to get me fired. That's what we call the headhunter FBI people, who are basically in charge of getting FBI agents framed and fired for whatever they happen to be doing. So he sent the angel of death to try to work up something against me to try to get me fired before I retired. So I was already at 25 years, and they were trying to, and so Comey decided I had to be fired. So they did everything they could against me. They tried to get the U.S. attorneys, prosecutors to find something wrong in one of my cases, and it didn't work. It didn't work for them. And I went and got some spiritual help during that situation, and also I got some excellent lawyers to help me too, who were guys who defend law enforcement people. And FLIOA is the name of the organization. If any of you are federal law enforcement, you'd know FLIOA. They were excellent, and I was able to escape from Comey trying to do me in at that time. So I was really happy. Yeah. And that's all documented in a movie that came out last year called 1,000 Pieces. 1,000 Pieces, and I will put the whole story in there. It is crazy, crazy stuff. It's amazing.
So, knowing what you know now about the FBI, would you ever tell someone to join them?
Yeah, I would, but probably not right now, though. Thinking about it, well, probably not right now.
Yeah.
I'd wait for a different era.
Yeah. Well, anybody have a question for John? Yes, sir. What does he think about Judy Woods' book?
Is Judy Woods the stewardess lady? I'm sorry, flight attendant lady?
No, she, what her job was, the question was she quit her job to research fatality.
Yeah, I think she was a flight attendant. But yeah, her stuff looks really amazing, very, very amazing.
Amazing book, if you hadn't read it cover to cover, it's got full cover pictures. And it kind of leads to a direction most people don't look.
Yes.
She was a big fan of fatality. Anyway,
No, they didn't. They really didn't. And I would tell you, if you want to find out more about 9/11, read my book, The Para Investigators. The Para Investigators.
It's a good book. Yes, sir, in the back.
yeah, and we all saw the video of the planes crashing into the building.
We all saw the video of the planes crashing in the building.
How do we explain that?
How do we explain that?
We explain that with technology that is further ahead than what we understand currently. They used something that was like holograms, but that I believe also had solidity to them. They were more than just holograms. They were some kind of things that can also create sound and light and solidity of some kind. That's how I would say that's explained.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that done then to go ahead and attack Iran? Iraq? Was that the whole reason? Go after Saddam Hussein?
Well, they did need to go after Saddam Hussein. They needed some sort of excuse. But 9/11 was done for many, many reasons. And one of them, 9/11, I believe, was done by a cabal of elites that believed they ruled the earth and that were doing 9/11. I believe they were doing it as a ritual sacrifice as well to their dark gods. And one thing that I can actually prove to people is that if you look at all the CCTVs from that time, if you look at all the internal CCTVs, you look at all the stuff, they were hoping, they had arranged things in the few days before 9/11 in order to make sure that they killed 50,000 people, not 3,000 like they did. They were hoping to get 50,000 people. They had set up megaphones. They had set up the speaker systems with recorded devices, like the recorded message we just heard in here, but their recorded messages were set up with everything is fine. Just go back to your offices. Go back, listen to security. Go back to your offices. Everything is fine, it's being taken care of. You are safe and secure. And they put those on the speaker system just before 9/11 happened. And then they instructed all security personnel that any emergencies come up, always make people go back to their offices. Always. Do not let them, under any conditions, let them get out of the building, because you'll be creating more danger for them if you let them get out. So push them back in. If we hadn't had in every group that came down, there was one person that when they were confronted by security, and security tried to herd them back, one person would stand up and say, "Get the hell out of our way, we're coming through, we're getting out of here." And then everybody would follow that person, they'd get out. That happened dozens of times in those buildings. And every time, one time it was a janitorial person, another time it was a CEO of an accounting firm that was up there. But it was always one person that just stuck their head up and said, "There is no way we're going back up there. No way, you better get out of our way right now." And they always did. And that's the only reason that only 3,000 were killed that day. But they were shooting for more.
All the way in the back. Security.
I have a question. You brought up spirituality. So with all your investigations and everything, have you had personal paranormal experiences yourself in your own life? Things that you've done, whether you're younger or older, things like that?
Yeah. I've had many of them, yes. And I talk about all of them very openly in my book, The Extra Dimensionals, which tries to explain this whole area of life and how everything exists on a spiritual paranormal spectrum. And if you don't understand that component of it, then you're never gonna understand this area at all.
So that would include something like called demons, succubus, other creatures of that nature.
Well, that's interesting because I'm a follower of Christ, but I don't consider myself a mainstream Christian because I don't believe they really have anything to do with Christ anymore. But and one of the main things I get is I always get complaints from Christian people, mainstream Christian people, where it was like, why you're dealing with aliens and aliens are just demons. They're just demons. That's all they are. And they're not. They're absolutely not. According to my investigations, it looks like aliens are actually created creatures. They are created creatures by other races, like the Nephilim, for instance. I'm just using that as an example. Like the Nephilim, for instance, who I actually believe are probably fallen angels. So all of these things do exist, but they are different because demons and angels actually do have a connection to God. They have some sort of connection back to Creator Force because they were actually created by God originally. But aliens were not. All the alien races, they were not created by God. They are themselves created by other creatures. That's why they're so anxious to get a connection to us. Yeah.
One last question in the back.
Okay, so circling back to your material movie, David, but for both of you guys, kind of a speculative question. Imagine if we were able to, after enough people have gone missing, where we say, okay, enough's enough, we need to really pour some resources and some science into developing the technology to open or keep open or track or somehow find these portals or these gateways. I would imagine that there might be some people who are considering some protocols as to how to explore or even to some degree exploit these openings to get these answers, to really understand what's going on.
That's funny that you say that. I've already done that, and I came up with it. Are you ready to hear it? Okay. One profile point that I have noticed in virtually every case that we've gone through here with David and with the FBI as well, is that whether it is for 10 seconds or whether it is for 10 minutes or 10 hours, every single person who ends up as a disappearance case, it appears, has been alone for a certain period of time. Completely alone. No direct observers, nothing. I think if we could just create an etiquette for people who are hiking, camping, whatever, we could stop a lot of this thing. It appears there's something mechanical involved in this. And I say mechanical because it always does the same. The intelligence appears to always do the same thing over and over again, which is it will only take people if they're alone, without direct observers. That's what it looks like to me. So if we could, we have a whole bunch of cases that are called the I gotta pee cases. The I gotta pee cases. Because the person was with, like they tell you always, for safety. They were with a bunch of people. They were with everybody. They were all together, protecting each other. But then it's like, I'm sorry, I'm shy. I gotta pee. I gotta go behind that bush right there. I'll just be gone a couple of seconds. And then they disappear. If we could just get people to stop being alone when they're out in these places, I think a lot would be solved in this area. What do you think, Dave?
I call them point of separation, and yeah, they exist. It's a phenomenal number. And I would say probably 98, 99% of the cases are just exactly that. They're alone, no eyes are on them, and yeah. Well, John, you've been quite a guest, and Thanks for being here and thanks for the interview.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.